we've touched on. There's a lot of electric cars coming through. They need to be charged. And so James Cozens from ChargeNet is here to tell us about what you need on your dealership, I guess, to keep those cars charged, and what technology is there and what you should be doing. There you go.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Am I switched on now?
You are.
Okay. Right, I've got 15 minutes to talk about a topic that I could talk all afternoon for and bore you to death, but I'll get through it as quickly as I can. Obviously, the presentation is going to be available to all of you. There's a lot more detail on the slides I'm actually going to go through, but I'll just run through it as quickly as I can. Okay, why should you bother? Well, there's some incredible tailwinds in place at the moment. Regardless of what our government is doing, the rest of the world is actually moving forward in terms of electrification. Manufacturers are no longer going to be manufacturing petrol and diesel vehicles. Now, if you look at our EV uptake at the moment, the figures here, 61,000 EVs in New Zealand at the end of October. Small beer compared to the number of diesel and petrol vehicles on the road. But when you look at the September sales figures for new vehicles, top-selling car in New Zealand was a Tesla Model Y, outshone the Ford Ranger by 500. So 1,500 Teslas in September compared to 1,000 Ford Rangers. Okay, it changed in October. The Ford Ranger was the top-selling car again in October because Tesla didn't have a ship coming in. And that illustrates the other thing, is that it's not the actual demand for electric vehicles that's causing the issue at the moment, it's the supply in terms of getting them actually onto the docks and to the consumers. So if we look at the charging side of it, there's a bit of an ecosystem here. It's already been alluded to this morning in terms of, do we have enough electric vehicle chargers? Well, bearing in mind that 82% of the charging in New Zealand is done at home, yes, we have a heck of a lot of charging points in New Zealand, because everyone who has a 3-pin socket in their garage has the ability to charge their vehicle. The other thing to bear in mind, and it was interesting with Simon Bridges this morning, because I was there when he actually launched the Low Emission Vehicle Contestable Fund back in 2016, the average distance traveled by a vehicle in New Zealand is only 30 kilometers a day. Now, even your humble Nissan Leaf, the version 1 of the Nissan Leaf, which may only have a range of, 100k now, Hayden, probably? Yeah. In terms of average distance traveled in most of our cities, that's well within range. You can plug in it at home at night, and basically it's charged in the morning. Now, in terms of what's happening in the rest of the world, and it was interesting hearing Todd and Greg, and I know Todd was saying, well, let's focus on what's happening in New Zealand, but I think we can't ignore what's happening in the rest of the world in terms of ignoring government policy, in terms of other countries saying that they don't want any ICE vehicles after 2025 or 2030 or 2035, looking at what the manufacturers are doing. Now, General Motors launched the EV1 years ago and then scrapped it after 2 years because of the pressure getting from oil and gas and the pressure from federal government at the time. General Motors are spending $35 billion US, not New Zealand, to introduce 30 EVs by 2025. Half of their plants in North America by 2030 will be just producing electric vehicles. In terms of the vehicles that are available, how many of you have always wanted to have a Hummer? Now, if you've got $106,000 US available, 1,000 horsepower, 3 electric motors, 0 to 100 in 3.3 seconds, 500 kilometers range. It has a WTF launch mode, which is actually watts to freedom, although our TikTok man would probably say something else. And the interesting thing is, Hummer have had to close off registrations at 90,000. And I think this is the thing that Todd was talking about earlier, is that Tesla were the first ones to have online ordering, partly because they don't use dealers. They have their own shops, effectively. Tesla had hundreds of thousands of advance orders for the Model 3 before it was even manufactured. So the rest of the industry is rapidly catching up. Ford Lightning, 200,000 units pre-ordered registration closed. They can't produce enough of them. The Mustang Mach-E, they've closed reservations on the Mustang Mach-E because they can't actually manufacture enough at this moment in time. So closer to home, just in terms of what's happening, Volvo did a similar presentation this week in Australia. The managing director said there's no long-term future for cars with an internal combustion engine. Now, I think a more positive statement from him was that the acceleration of change is happening so fast, it will only get faster. Now, Volvo in Australia, worldwide, 2030, no petrol and diesel vehicles being produced. In Australia, 2026. Volvo will not sell any petrol or diesel vehicles in Australia from 2026 onwards. So the reason I'm mentioning all this, it just gives you an idea of the environment that we're working in and will be working in future. Relating that to what you need to do as dealers, or may want to look at as dealers, in terms of providing charging to customers and maybe charging to the public. Now, the days when nobody, I don't know how many dealerships have their own petrol pumps or their own diesel pumps. Obviously, all of you have already got charging points. I mean, if you have electricity in your dealership, you've already got charging points. And some of these vehicles you can just plug in overnight on a 3-pin socket and you'll get a charge. So. But if you look at it from the point of view of what else that can give to your dealership, additional revenue if you've actually got a public-facing charger, and I'll show a couple of examples of that in a minute. It obviously adds value to your business if you've actually got charging on site. It gives you greater visibility in terms of customers. It means you're all part of that evolution and shows that you're forward-thinking and not living in the past. And also, if you've got a site that you want to attract customers to, someone turning up in their Nissan Leaf who may want to buy something else, like a BMW or a Volvo or a VW, it makes an opportunity to actually get people onto your site. One thing I would say, and it doesn't matter whether you're running a fleet or a dealership, is try and find someone within the dealership and within the business that can actually be a champion, be a charging champion. Ideally, someone in the dealership who actually understands EVs and maybe ideally has their own EV. I remember doing I won't mention the manufacturer, I remember doing an EV day once where one manufacturer turned up, they lent us a loan vehicle, an EV, and I said, well, aren't you going to stay for the day to demonstrate it to customers? And he said, oh, no, I'm going to go back to the dealership and sell some real cars. You don't need someone like that within your dealership who's responsible for looking after your infrastructure and your EV plans. So consider someone who's got an EV or a sustainability manager, or a couple of dealerships I'm dealing with, their property manager, which makes sense. And someone who can actually dedicate some time to researching and planning to make sure whatever program, whatever charging you're putting in is actually planned properly. Things you need to look at, how many vehicles need charging each day? You may, as I said, be able to get by with just a 3-pin socket for what you need. You may want just a 7-kilowatt AC charger, which is only going to cost you about $2,000. You may want a 150-kilowatt charger if you're running Audi e-trons and bigger machines like Porsche Taycans. So how quickly do they need to charge? When do they need to charge? If you can get away with charging overnight, it's a much cheaper option, both in terms of electricity prices and also in terms of the cost of actually the power. And will you make them accessible to the public? Because if you can make a charger accessible to the public, as several dealerships have already done, you can obviously get revenue from that. You can get new potential customers coming to the business, and obviously then reduce your cost of the actual investment in the first place. Work out what power you've got. I mean, some of the sites you've got for dealerships may not have sufficient power for a really grunty charger, but most sites would have power for a 7-kilowatt or 22-kilowatt AC machine. If a range is greater than daily consumption, i.e. if you're looking at vehicles that aren't doing a massive amount of mileage, then charging overnight is going to be suitable. So you've got to match the charge rate that you're offering with the amount of time that the vehicle's got available to charge. It's a picture here of the 150 kilowatt ABB unit at the Audi Giltrap site in Grey Lynn. That's a 150 kilowatt unit. That is available to the public as well as obviously to their own vehicles. The reason they've got that sort of grunty DC unit is the Audi e-tron actually charges at a much faster speed than some of the other vehicles, so it actually gives them the capability of charging their own fleet vehicles really, really quickly, but also to get revenue from the public when they're not actually using it themselves. Other things you need to consider is the time frame you've got in terms of installation. It's very easy to use a 3-pin socket. You just plug in the charger that's provided with the car and you switch it on. An AC machine takes very little time to install. A DC machine takes a bit longer, and you need to look at, obviously, the connection cost and actually the power that's available in the area. Also looking at the back-end charger management software, something that ChargeNet provide, but there are other providers of software, and sometimes the software will actually come with the units that you buy. How you want to control access to the machine, if it's just going to be your own fleet, your own vehicles, looking at the usage of the vehicle, of the charger during the day, looking at the load management, because with software, suitable back-end software, you can actually manage the load on the charger, which actually reduces your cost and less likelihood for you to blow the main fuses. And then giving you some feedback in terms of the back-end software, in terms of faults, in terms of billing, if you want to actually have it accessible to the public and you want to actually make some revenue from it, and ability to integrate with other public networks such as ChargeNet. It may be worth investigating outsourcing the whole project if you haven't got the resources in-house. Make sure that if you are outsourcing, you're using a project manager or someone who's managing the project isn't tied into one particular manufacturer, one particular charger manufacturer, because that way you're actually going to get unbiased and agnostic advice. But certainly you can outsource the project management, you can outsource the procurement of the product, and obviously outsource the managing of contractors. But quite a lot of dealerships I know already have their own Sparkies, have their own property teams, and are often well able to do that within their own capabilities. And then after the charger has been installed, you need to have some sort of process in terms of looking at the utilization of that machine, comparing it with your original plan and what you thought was going to happen, monitoring it for any congestion if it's a public charger, because you may need to increase the amount of charging capability, and looking at expansion over time. So just to summarize that, before I just go on to 2 more slides, I think Richard's looking at me now. Choose a charging champion. Evaluate your demand for the charger in terms of what you need. Work out your power requirements. Several important considerations. Looking at charger management software in the back end. Will you outsource? And then looking at post-installation monitoring. And just a couple more slides to finish. Looking at the different chargers. 3-pin socket. In 15 minutes, we'll put 3 kilometers in the tank at one end. A 300 kilowatt charger on a Porsche Taycan will put 400 kilometers in the tank in 15 minutes. And that just shows the progression of charging. And there in the middle, you've got a 25 kilowatt unit, which will put 30 odd kilometers in the tank in 15 minutes. And, quite frankly, with a lot of dealerships, this sort of mid-range charger would be suitable. And those are the different types of DC chargers, from the 300 kilowatt and 150 kilowatt unit ABB, which are the big boys, down to the 50 kilowatt and the 25 kilowatt units, which are obviously less powerful and also less expensive to install. And then looking at AC chargers, you've got 7 kilowatt machines. These are the ones that we got deployed across Auckland. You've got 22 kilowatt units, which are normally on a pedestal. And then these are the ones that are on Wellington Street side, which are AC units. So there's a lot of detail there. I've rushed through in 15 minutes. If you've got any questions, that's my email address. That's my mobile number. So if anyone wants a follow-up visit or a follow-up consultation, just give me a call or send me an email. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Did anyone have any quick questions for James? Got a question in here.
How much revenue can you make having a charger on site?
It depends where the charger is situated. I would say average gross revenue about $2,000 to $3,000 a month on a good traffic site. If you've got somewhere like Waitiki Landing or Bluff, then you wouldn't get that sort of revenue. But what you've got to factor into that is the cost of electricity, and that can vary hugely from site to site. But yeah, generally you can get enough revenue to cover your costs in terms of your return on investment. Some of our sites would, 3 years, Some of them might be 20 years. But yeah, I mean, if anyone's got a specific site in mind, I'm happy to work with you in terms of what the likely revenue is going to be and also the likely cost as well.
I guess anything that can make more utilisation revenue from existing land is always going to be a good thing for,
That's right.
for particularly dealers that are quite often land heavy, I guess. Great.
And if you've got a dealership that's got a cafe or something like that, then obviously, I mean, a lot of these chargers are actually at sites that are either supermarkets or cafes or so you're actually going to get that revenue from an additional source, which is why the energy companies like electric vehicle chargers, whether it's BP or Z, because you're going to go there, spend 20 minutes on the charger. What are you going to do? Go and get a coffee, go and get a donut, whatever, And I understand they make almost as much money from selling coffee and donuts as they do from selling petrol,
Hey, James. Hey, EV charging technology is progressing at a rapid pace, and very shortly we're going to be able to order cars with vehicle-to-grid technology.
Yeah.
Are the charging suppliers or the charging industry equipped to deal with vehicle-to-grid cars and the support there from a hardware point of view?
Yeah, and I think the bigger parts of the charger industry have their own development teams and software teams that are basically working on that integration work all the time. And we've got 7 developers at ChargeNet, for example. The majority of our support side is actually on the development and future development. So yes, to answer your question. And this whole concept of vehicle to grid, and one thing that was mentioned this morning was the availability of power. Well, we do have a huge amount of renewable energy, and we have more consented renewable energy than we actually need at the moment. So the new wind farm at Manawatu, stage 2 of the Mercury wind farm at Manawatu, just to give you an indication, that's coming online probably May next year. That will produce more power, or enough power, to charge 350,000 electric vehicles. That's just one part of a wind farm that's planned. We've got another one planned down in Gore. They're looking at Taranaki, in the sea at Taranaki, which is what they've done in Scotland. 40% of Scotland's energy comes from the North Sea, from wind power. Used to come from oil rigs. Now the North Sea is being used to produce energy from wind farms, which is obviously a very, very good renewable resource. And we've got plenty of wind in New Zealand, particularly in Wellington, particularly around the Beehive. So we have a massive wind farm there.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Excellent. We're going to send a box of beer to the front row, I think, Graham, on that one. Great. Cool. Now, who here's business has been affected by the triple CFA over the last year? So pretty much every dealer or finance company in the place should have their hand up on that one.